Hello, I'm Pompilio, and welcome to QED Sport and to this episode of our QED Sport Interviews series, where we bring you conversations with experts, athletes, coaches, and researchers on sports culture, sports history, and in-depth sport analysis. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We love hearing from you. In today's episode, we'll be talking about American football and more specifically the Super Bowl, that mega event that captures the world's attention every year. Our guest today is Gerald Gems, a leading scholar in sports history and sports studies. Hi, Jerry. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
First of all, I like to say a few words about you for our viewers. I also have a few of your books here, which I highly recommend. So, Jerry, born and raised in Chicago, is an emeritus professor of kinesiology at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois, and a leading international scholar in sport history and sport studies. He's a former president of the North American Society for Sport History and has held senior leadership roles within the International Society for the History of Physical Education and Sport. A recipient of the prestigious Fulbright Scholarship, he taught at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, the University of Malmö in Sweden. He was also one of the key faculty members of the renowned Copenhagen Summer School, organized for many years by Gertrud Pfister for doctoral students from around the world. And there I first met him in 2011. Jerry Gems has authored more than 250 scholarly publications, including over 20 books, and has received the Routledge International Award for sports history. His work focuses on the intersection of sport with ethnicity, race, gender, social class, and American culture, examining the broader role of sport in society. Jerry, I have your book here, and the cover features a scene from an American football game, which says a lot about what you consider representative of the history of American sport. So before we focus on the Super Bowl, I'd like to explore the broader role of American football within US society. Me coming from Eastern Europe, I realize that many viewers around the world are often struck by the immense popularity. I've had the opportunity to attend college games, and I was truly impressed by the scale of the audiences. So, how did American football become such a big phenomenon?
Well, American football actually starts in 1869 at two prestigious colleges, which at that time was really a soccer game. And over the succeeding decades, the game transitions from soccer to rugby to the more specialized American football game. It takes about 3 decades for that complete transition to take place. Actually, yeah, almost 4 decades until you would recognize it as the game as it's played today. But the reason it became so popular, I think you were probably familiar with Michael Oriard and some of his books, who is a college professor, but also was a professional football player. And in his books, he claims that football is really a cultural text, which I agree with, and is. I have a number of books addressed it as such. So if you look at sport anthropologically, the way that football acts as a cultural text is it crosses very many social divisions within the American American society, such as social class, ethnicity, race, gender, and politics, and in some ways brings all of these things together in ways that you could say all Americans not necessarily agree upon, but it forms a basis for people to come together in a certain celebration each week, whether you're playing against someone, uh, in terms of civic rivalries or um, sectional rivalries, but it has common features for everybody to enjoy. So in that sense, it becomes somewhat of a unifying force, homogenizing American culture. But in other ways, if you look at it anthropologically, it also mirrors the violence of American culture. As you know, you've watched some games. It can be very violent. It was much more violent uh, at its inception. I mean, you could punch an opponent in the 1880s 2 times before you got kicked out of a game. Um, the the intent, and still to some extent, it's been uh, a focus of diminishing the violence because of the injuries incurred and actually deaths incurred in the game itself was almost banned in 1905 when there were, I believe it was 20, something like 25 deaths or something in football that year. And actually the president, Theodore Roosevelt at the time, had to step in and uh, initiate reforms in the game, which eventually included, up until that time, you could not throw the ball. After that time, the forward pass was allowed to make the game more free-flowing instead of the brutal pileups and things that cause these injuries. So even today, that measure of violence, it's not what it was, but one of the factors that remains is the tremendous amount of physical damage to the brain, and that's been the focus of a lot of medical studies since the early 20th century, with the great number of what they call CTE, chronic uh, traumatic encephalopathy of the brain, brain damage, which causes early death and there's a larger percentage of that among football players. Okay. But the way that it either brings people together or encourages rivalries is through what would be a form of surrogate warfare, right? Civic rivalries, for example, between my city, Chicago, and their professional football team, and the Green Bay Packers, which is a small city of about 200,000 people, the only small city in the National Football League, in the adjoining state of Wisconsin. They were both members of the original National Professional Football League and have been playing each other ever since. Okay, so this is an ongoing rivalry that's going on for more than a century now. And the reason that Green Bay is the only small city in the National Football League is because it is owned by the community itself, and they're never going to give it up. Okay, when people get divorced in Green Bay, they don't argue who gets the dog or the car or the house. They argue who gets the football tickets to the football game. Okay, so it's that important, especially in a small community, which gives it a national prominence, within the entire country. Okay. Football is so entrenched in American culture that during football season, which usually starts in August and runs at the professional level until February with the culmination of the Super Bowl, even the best high school games are nationally televised. Okay, so this brings even small towns, especially in the South, where football is a form of a national religion. Their football teams can be seen on national television throughout the week during the football season. And in fact, this fascination with football, you see it in Chicago as early as 1927 on a religious level, where Catholic high schools challenged the public high school champions to a game, okay, to decide who would be the high school champion of the city. And in 1927, they played in Soldier Field, what is today the stadium used by the professional Chicago Bears team. 120,000 people came to a high school game. Okay? So already football had taken great hold in United States, by the 1920s, and this produced a lot of famous players as well as famous coaches as well. And even to this day, coaches and players are, national celebrities on a par with, movie stars and other such people.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great insight. Uh, Jerry, one of the books you edited together with Gertrude Pfister has an intriguing title, Touchdown, An American Obsession. Here you say that football had already become a big business by the 1880s as Harvard, Princeton, and Yale had to rent New York arenas to accommodate their legions of fans. How did educational institutions like Ivy League universities influence the early growth of American football?
Yeah, it was the Ivy Leagues that established football in the national culture, and all other colleges followed their lead. In fact, Walter Camp, who was basically the athletic director and coach at Yale, uh, ran the rules committee for almost 50 years. So he's considered the father of American football with these transitions that I mentioned before, with the mass plays eventually becoming more wide open with passing and other types of strategic variations that change the game to some extent to the game that we see today. So they were the forerunners and of the game of football, and the rule changes that Camp made opened the game up to what was basically described as a brawl between 22 prize fighters, meaning the football players, rather than the more wide open game of soccer, right? So it was the American Ivy League schools, the top schools, and because of those schools, the patrons of those schools and the children of those patrons were students at the school who played the game. It was a game of the upper classes, not of the working class. Okay, and so because it was taken hold and by the upper classes, it got more distribution, more popularity, and more uh, exposure through the national media, the newspapers and magazines at the time. This is how the game spread. It would after 1900, and with the Industrial Revolution, you see people with more leisure time, especially the middle class that grew above the upper middle classes, but um, as the working class and the ethnic groups that immigrated to the United States and greatly became large populations in the major cities, who had no college education, but what they did have was physical prowess. Okay, and because of many of the early professional teams were actually um, company teams. They started as the means that the owners of the companies had large athletic programs in order as a measure of really social control, to try to control their workers in the leisure time that they did have on weekends, um, to give them something to do, to keep them involved with the company, but also to basically to use their time, socially control their time, so that they would not be spending it in the saloons and bars, because sometimes they got drunk, they wouldn't report to work on Monday. Okay, so it was a way to not only instill pride in the company, but also develop competitions out of the actual promotion of the whatever the company was producing against other competing companies that produce the same types of goods, right? So instilled pride in the company. Some of these company sports programs were really massive, with many different sports year round and involving thousands of employees. And these company programs evolve into professional programs because the owners wanted to make sure that they had winning programs. And the first professional started in 1892, and it was between two. There was two the middle class athletic clubs were playing each other, and there was a sizable amount of money bet on the game, right? And so what one of the teams did was paid, I think it was over $500 to the top football player at the time, and invited him to come and play for them, which in fact, his prowess in the game won the game for them, right? And whatever money was bet on it. From that point on, others start paying the best players to come and play for them until it evolved into, fully professional teams shortly after about 1900, right? These fully professional teams were centered in the Midwest states, and they gathered together in 1920 in a meeting in an automobile showroom, okay, and formed what has now become the National Football League, a fully professional league throughout the United States that is obviously the most prominent sport in the United States. It overtook what had been the national game of baseball by about 1960 or so.
So the NFL emerged in 1920 in a fragmented sporting landscape, competing not only with other leagues but also with baseball. It was the Babe Ruth era. Horse racing was still very popular, I think, and in boxing it was the age of Jack Dempsey. In this context, what factors allowed the NFL to survive and eventually dominate the crowded environment?
Yeah, in fact, pro football was a minor sport at that time. Professionalism, at least by the upper classes, was looked down upon as unworthy and often seen as something disrespectful. And so it took some time for professional football to catch on and reach the levels that it did by the 1960s. And part of that was some of the star players that came out of the college ranks. In 1920, the top star player was a guy named Red Grange from the University of Illinois, joins the Chicago Bears. And because he had become so famous in college, people then wanted to see him at the professional levels. In fact, they go on a huge tour across the country with him playing games, every 3 days or so as many people as possible could see him, right? And this trend would continue. As you said, Babe Ruth was the famous star in baseball at the time. Baseball was the king of sports in the United States, but gradually, professional football then would catch on with these star players, and also it had a great relation to militarism. So the World War II especially gives a great promotion to baseball because something, as I wrote in one of my books, something like 55 or 60 of the generals and admirals in World War II had been football players. And so the newspapers and others were drawing a great correlation between football and militarism and how it produced the kinds of men who made great soldiers or sailors for the war effort. And so it gained a greater sense of patriotism at the time as well. And the military services, such as the Army, would have their own. They used football as a way to encourage, not only physicality but fitness had their own teams, and in fact, even during World War I, when the colleges, many of the colleges did not play football anymore. The Rose Bowl, which is the college equivalent of what is the Super Bowl among the pros, was played for 2 years, 1917, 1918, between military teams rather than college teams. Okay, so again, this gave a great impetus to the interest in football as well. So you can see a very close attachment between the military and football. In fact, today, the most prominent games you'll probably see at the Super Bowl They have flyovers by the Air Force jets before the game starts. The halftime intermission often promotes militarism with marching bands and things extolling the military. And even before the game, they start the game with the nationalistic singing of the national anthem. So there's all kinds of patriotic ties between football and the military that continue today.
And it is also a rivalry between Army and Navy, isn't it?
Yes, that's a game that's been going on between the Army and Navy, the Naval Academies, since 1890. The president is usually present at the game and has to sit on one side during one half and one side on the other half. But that's been one of the other ties to militarism for over a century now.
From a European perspective, the closed franchise system of American sports feels unusual, especially without promotion or relegation. How did this economic model shape competitive balance and long-term stability in football?
Yeah, that's something my wife, Gertrude Pfister, is amazed by, the lack of relegation to bad teams, okay? But economically, the NFL operates as a cartel. It is a monopoly, okay? It's and it's sanctioned, not only sanctioned and enhanced by Congress, who makes create laws beneficial to the league and favorable legislation, such as tax concessions and other things that allow them to operate as a monopoly. So the way they get around that legally is, after so many years, they will add one or two teams to the league. But that's happened gradually over the years. Okay, there weren't that many teams. Well, initially there were quite a few small town teams, but as the league grew, it weeded out the small town teams in favor of large city teams, which would produce more revenue. So the other way that it helps the Congress helps the NFL to create and maintain this status is by providing stadium subsidies. In fact, right now, the Chicago professional team is trying to get a new stadium. The city is reluctant to pay for it. And so they have competing teams, a suburb who's actually a northwest suburb of Chicago, where they've already purchased land for a stadium. And now they are having a competing team who's not even in Illinois. It's right across the state line in Indiana, who is offering to pay for a new stadium for the Bears. So every so many years, every 30 years or so, the teams try to create newer stadiums with greater technology and greater seating capacity. And often it ends up with the people of that community paying the subsidies to build those stadiums. They also have shared revenue. Otherwise, the team that I told you, the small town of Green Bay, could not possibly compete with large cities. But because the owners share the revenue, it keeps most of the teams fairly not only stable, but also you don't see any of the teams going out of business. Although when the owners decide to sell, it's for enormous prices, billions of dollars to another group. They maximize their profits through television ads, which you will see on the Super Bowl. I looked it up this week. The TV commercial for a Super Bowl, 30-second commercial, will cost companies $8 million this year to put on a television commercial. So they maximize their profits. The fans also, contribute greatly to that by the clothing sales that promote their own civic pride, their own identity with the team. And as you know, and probably part of the reason for this presentation, is the global reach of the National Football League. It's televised in more than 100 countries. The National Football League, which had not been successful in NFL Europe, they tried a number of years ago, but they're trying again. They have another plan. You see each year international games in Europe, last year in Brazil. For next year, they plan to play a game in Australia. The commissioner just announced this past week that he would like them to play as many as 17 games, I think,
Wow.
in future years overseas. And some of the biggest crowds they've drawn are in Mexico. And the purpose of that is to attract greater numbers of the Latino community throughout the world. And so they have plans. Also, they've involved in China as well. So they have great plans to expand beyond just North America and challenge the dominance of soccer in the world.
So we had the National Football League holding a monopoly, and yet in this context, I'm coming back to the 60s, let's say, when everything seemed stable, the American Football League emerged in resistance. How did this emergence happen, and what did it represent at that moment?
You had two rival leagues because football became so successful by the end of the 1950s when it was greatly televised, and this reached many more fans and grew the sport. So they were so popular that two millionaires decided to create their own league. They wanted to get franchises in the National Football League and were denied. As I said, it's a monopoly and hard to get into. So they created their own American Football League. So in the 1960s, you had two different professional leagues operating in the United States. And then in 1966, because of this, that was to some extent hurting the income of the National Football League. They agreed on playing a game between the champions of the two leagues, which 3 years later was eventually named the Super Bowl. But this rivalry then merged at the end of the 1960s to form the larger National Football League that we have today.
How did it earn its iconic name?
The National Football League?
No, the Super Bowl. How
the
did
Super Bowl. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think it was given the name by one of the producers of the game, because it was I think the third game that finally started to be calling a Super Bowl, just took the name from a toy that one of his children played with, right? Okay. Super something. I don't know what it was, but he called it a Super Bowl, and it's that attachment to the game. It became normalized and has become the name ever since.
Okay, so from what I understand, the first Super Bowl in '67 was not immediately seen as a cultural event, but more as a solution to a league rivalry. So
yes.
When did the Super Bowl begin to mean more than just a championship game?
As it grew, by the 1970s already, it becomes entrenched with, and you see today people having parties over the Super Bowl. The parties may start the whole week beforehand, and bars particularly will have Super Bowl parties, all kinds of festivities. Tailgating, you probably saw tailgating during your time in Pennsylvania, okay, where people have parties in the parking lot starting many, many hours before the game. The halftime show, in fact, the halftime show this year is very controversial because I don't know if you know the name Bad Bunny, the rapper singer from Puerto Rico, who President Trump dislikes greatly, and he criticizes Trump, tried to get them to cancel his performance, but the NFL is one of their major interests, as I said before, is growing the game among Latino groups, and so they refused to adhere to Trump's admonitions, and he will perform at halftime this year. So as it gradually grew, it became bigger and bigger. So as I said, it has a status as an unofficial national holiday. At this point, even beyond the U.S., the global audience last year was something like 191 million.
Mm-hmm. The Super Bowl trophy is named after Vince Lombardi. Could you tell us a bit about who he was and about the early years of the Super Bowl, and why was it his name and not someone else's that came to define the trophy?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned a little bit how football drew in many different groups, the working class, but also different ethnic groups. Okay, so
Mhm.
ethnic groups were largely working class when they came in as immigrants. They didn't have a lot of money, but one thing they did have was some physical prowess based on their jobs in labor, and many of them were very good football players. Vince Lombardi played at Fordham University. He became a coach afterwards. In fact, he was the became the coach of the Green Bay Packers for many years. Okay, the Green Bay Packers were a dominant team in the 1960s. They were the ones that uh, played in the first Super Bowls, first two Super Bowls, I think, and their coach was one way, and Italians in particular gained some also in boxing with uh, trying to think, Rocky Marciano as a heavyweight champion, okay, gained some status in the American community. But because Vince Lombardi's Packers were dominant and won the first couple Super Bowls and were a dominant team in the league, and his um, performance as a coach was esteemed throughout the country, right? The Super Bowl trophy was then named after him.
Mhm. Uh, because you mentioned at the beginning one of the recurring controversies and one that often comes up in the context of the Super Bowl concerns the violence of the sport, which contrasts with the almost gladiatorial image of its players. What I'm trying to say, and I'm thinking here of Norbert Elias's argument that modern society tend toward increasingly controlled form of violence, including in sport, is how do you see this contrast today, especially considering that athletes seem to be getting stronger and the stakes of a Super Bowl are higher than ever?
Yeah, the as I said, the initially the NFL tried to discredit the emergence of CTE and the brain damage in the players for
Mhm.
about 15 years until they no longer could discredit it. That the medical science has determined the causes. Uh, by the massive and continual hits to the head. Uh, and so, uh, could you restate your question again?
Yeah, how do you see this contrast between the or controversy, let's say, about the image of uh, gladiatorial athlete, and on the other side, uh, this interest or care regarding the uh, injuries.
Yeah. Okay. So this this issue of violence goes way back to the 19th century, and it has a great um, correlation with gender identity. Because after the Civil War, you have maybe the first generation of young people who did not fight in a war. If you look at American culture, every generation has fought in some war. So football became a way to demonstrate their masculinity when they didn't have a war to fight in. All right. Also, during this time, there was a great um, increase in the feminization of culture, and with women moving beyond domesticity and the home and getting involved in other things in sport as well. Okay, so football was one way to publicly um, demonstrate your masculinity and martial spirit, which in many ways the game was compared to a military war. And if you look at the vocabulary of football as well, there are many terms that correlate with military operations. Okay, a long pass is called a bomb. I mean, the battles between the linemen in the front line are called battles in the trenches. When they attack the quarterback, it's called the blitz. The quarterback is called the field general. So there are all kinds of military terminology associated with the game, right? Um, but whereas women have been relegated to flag football, there's not any physical contact, and there's even going to be an Olympic demonstration of that sport. And also, as cheerleaders, it it maintains this perception of football being a masculine game, something to promote and display your masculinity for the public, whereas it creates a clear distinction. It's the only game, I think, at this point, although there is a women's professional tackle football league, they get very little publication. It's a way for men to demonstrate their masculinity. And as I said, even though they try to control the violence, it's still the most physical game of any professional sport.
Mhm. There are major rivalries shaped by the Super Bowl. I don't know, big franchises which confronts regularly, and I don't know, Super Bowl shaped in any way rivalry.
Yeah, it does, but the process of getting to the Super Bowl is a difficult one. So oftentimes it creates rivalries because, for example, this one involves the New England Patriots, who have been in the most Super Bowls. So it can create an instant rivalry with another team, whether they win or lose. But oftentimes the civic rivalries are played out during the regular season because the league is arranged geographically. Teams in the same region would play in the same division, would play each other twice per year. So, for example, the Chicago team, my team, and the Green Bay team are in the same region. They've played more than any other two teams in the history of American football, professional football. And they were quite evenly matched most of those times. I think Green Bay has now won more games than the Bears, but the Bears have won the last two, and so people in Chicago have been rejoiced for weeks over that. So these civil rivalries and the fact that they are played out, at least most of the time twice per season, creates tremendous interest in those particular communities. But instant rivalries can be developed through the Super Bowl, because the Dallas Cowboys is another team that has a large following throughout the state of Texas, and they've been in the Super Bowl a number of times, not recently, but are often compared with other teams in terms of their mass following. And so the Super Bowl is just the culmination of these rivalries that get played out on the national stage once a year.
Given that football reflects broader social tensions, what societal debates or anxieties become most visible around the Super Bowl, if there is a discussion here?
Yeah, well, you can see that in the political sphere. Presidents have often been fans. I mean, a number of them, Woodrow Wilson, the president of World War I, was actually a coach of the Princeton College team. President Eisenhower, after World War, he at West Point, he was a football player on the Army team. Gerald Ford was a player at the University of Michigan. Nixon played on his college team. John F. Kennedy was a large fan. Ronald Reagan, his most famous movie role was about a football player at Notre Dame. Trump was even a team owner of an alternative league and blamed for the collapse of that league largely. But you see the political divisions within the country played out as well. This was most evident a couple of years ago when football players led by Colin Kaepernick, quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, got involved in social protests during the Black Lives Matter movement. And that became a national debate, with the president stepping in and trying to get him fired. And eventually he never was rehired by any other team. But that continues to be an issue. And we said today, he still played out even at the halftime performance, with the president trying to intervene with this year's halftime performance, and the NFL actually opposing him, which is unusual. So I mentioned the halftime shows already, but and the pregame shows, but you see a lot of these divisions played out among the players now, as not only in football but in many of the professional sports. The athletes have a huge public stage, and with the massive outreach of social media, they're all on that as well, sharing their opinions about the political situations, which gives them and gives the sport, a much wider public display. And oftentimes, and especially in the Trump administration, his press secretary is offering, admonishing professional athletes to just shut up and play ball. So you see the different political views of people being played out on the athletic stage as well now.
Because you mentioned the players, who were the most influential figures and what made them exceptional. Because, for instance, when we talk about iconic figures in the NFL, people often mention Tom Brady as a legendary player. So in your view, what actually makes an athlete legendary in the context of Super Bowl?
Well, to gain legendary status, a player, any athlete, has to be a superlative in their performance over an extended period of time. And Tom Brady, I think, was in something like 7 Super Bowls, and he was one of the last players actually drafted for the professional ranks. And so it's kind of a nice story of the kid that was unwanted who becomes the heroic figure in the game. So he's gained that status in that respect. But you've had, as I said, in the early 1920s, you had Red Grange, who scored 6 touchdowns in one game, which made him famous. And then he goes on to play professionally for the Bears. And so you had these players who performed at a high level over a number of years. So it wasn't just the one time though they had a great game or one great performance. There has to be a continued performance over a lengthy period of time to ensure their status as something of a heroic player. But some of the other qualities, sometimes now, because athletes are outspoken in terms of what they do outside of the game, in terms of their political affiliation, or one of the awards that the NFL likes to gives each year is the NFL Man of the Year Award, which is actually an award not for their performance on the field, but what their charitable works off the field. So the most famous player in Chicago history was a great runner called Walter Payton. But what Walter Payton did with his money, he provided a lot of charitable works and programs to the poorer people within the city of Chicago and the surrounding area. And since that, in fact, the award is named after him. So one player, I think, in each league will get chosen as the most charitable player who does the most for his community outside of the game itself. So these are some other ways in which the league, promotes its own not performance, but its own perception of itself as a charitable organization, right? As opposed to looking at it from the political standpoint, where they get so many breaks to become a monopoly and they're all billionaires, could take a different turn. So they're very much aware of their public perception, and they want to maintain that so that they continue to get the benefits from the Congress that they already receive.
When we look at the history of the Super Bowl, most of the host stadiums are located in the American South or in traditionally warm weather states. Given this pattern, why do you think the league continues to favor southern venues, and what does this geographic concentration tells us about how the Super Bowl is imagined and staged as a national event?
Yeah, there's a reason for that, and this current season is a good indication of that. They can't control the weather patterns, and so the southern states are usually warmer, which affect the nature of the game. In fact, the game last week in Denver was greatly determined by what happened in the fourth quarter when it began snowing and became a huge snowstorm, and neither team could move the ball or anything. And so they want to make the best possible effort to make the game competitive in good weather. And so this is why they hold it in the south or areas that are more likely to have warmer weather during this time of the year, because the Super Bowl is now always in February. It's a winter period where the northern climates experience a lot of snow, or at least cold weather. I mean, right now here it's minus 10 Celsius in Chicago. So it's difficult for the players to play in that type of weather, and it affects the day. I mean, if they throw the ball, if it's in a snowstorm, you can't see it anyway. So it affects the nature of play, and also the strategy of play in cold weather. When they kick the ball, it may not go as far. It may not go straight. Okay, if the wind's blowing hard, so they try to place the Super Bowl in a southerly climate, which is more likely to be more hospitable, and also, won't cut down on the potential sales of the game.
Yeah, because I was thinking that today we have ultra modern high tech arenas with roof and all
And so
facilities.
if they have a roof stadium, they could play it in a northern city.
Okay.
But also they want to attract people to that location, which brings much business, millions of dollars of business to that particular community as well. And so people are more likely to travel to a warmer climate than, because the Super Bowl is really 2 weeks of a buildup, which brings millions of dollars to the location, with people, going out to bars and restaurants and things leading up to the game or after the game. And it's much easier to attract people to a warmer climate than a snowy and cold one in the north.
Okay. Very interesting. What are some of the franchises that shaped the identity of the NFL, of the Super Bowl for you? So, and why are they still remembered today? You mentioned some cases. If there are any examples to give us.
Yeah, the one for me personally would be the Bears have only been in two, the Chicago Bears, but because of the rivalry with the Green Bay Packers, and it's been since 1920 they've been playing each other. The Dallas Cowboys have become a nationally recognized team with fans even outside of their own locale, because of their own promotional efforts and their success in the past. And certainly the New England Patriots, again playing in the most Super Bowls, playing again this year, have a large following. So others have had particular dynasties. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers during the 1970s, I think, won four in a row. And so there are particular teams that have created their own histories over time that draw people and draw interest. And there are others who've never made it to the Super Bowl, so there's still aspirations in that respect, such as this year. So the Seattle Seahawks have never been in a Super Bowl before, so they may draw increased patronage because of that. But there have been some iconic franchises that have. The Kansas City team as well over the past few years has been in a number of Super Bowls, and largely because of their principal player, Patrick Mahomes, their star quarterback, but also because of his teammate who plays and the position, pass catching position, who is now engaged to marry the most famous singing star in the world.
Yes.
So,
Indeed. How do you see the future of Super Bowl and NFL?
as I said, I think the Super Bowl, I think will always continue as the culmination of the season and the most important game, what every team aspires to be. In fact, a number of head coaches got fired already, even though they had good seasons, because they did not reach the Super Bowl this year. Okay, so their owners fired them, even though they have very positive coaching records and a history of success, because they did not get to the ultimate game, they lost their position. And quite a few coaches got fired this year already. What was the other part of the question you asked about?
Yeah, how do you see the future of the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think that, well, the Super Bowl will always be the most prominent game, the kind of the holy grail of the sport. But I think it would be interesting to look, if I had a crystal ball, 30 years down the line, if the NFL is successful in its global reach, the Super Bowl might involve a team from China or, Germany or even Romania. Who knows? If they reach their aspirations, the Super Bowl will become a global spectacle rather than just a national one. It would. I doubt that it will reach that point anytime soon, but it would rival the World Cup if they succeed in their goals.
Yeah, we have an American football championship in Romania, so for sure the passion is also in Eastern Europe. Jerry, that brings our conversation to a close. Thank you once again for sharing your expertise and helping us navigate the deeper history and cultural meaning of the Super Bowl and American football. For those of you watching, if you enjoyed this discussion, feel free to like the video, subscribe the channel, share with others who might appreciate. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What does American football mean to you? How do you experience the Super Bowl as a game, as a ritual, cultural moment? So thank you once again, Jerry, for the discussion, and to our viewers for watching us.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.